Hello again, this is my second guide for RobotC programming, and in this guide I want to give the basics of C programming. Like C and all languages like it, in the C family, there are all these common things called if, else, for statements, all these different types of tools that almost all programmers use for different scenarios. And I would like to briefly talk about all the different tools that are very common when it comes to programming for robotics. The first is an if statement. And basically, an if statement, what that does is that if you declare these variables here, and so I want to briefly talk about that. In programming, when you want to declare a variable, like in math, when you are supposed to let x equal blah 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 and let the math teacher know what x is referring to and all that stuff, you're basically doing this for the computer. You're telling the computer that you want to create an integer variable x and set it to 0. And so what that does is anytime you refer to x, it will automatically use the number 0. And so basically, if we have x, since we have that if statement, since we have that if statement, x is equal to 0, and notice I have two equal signs here. What happens is that's saying if the value of x is equal to 0. This is setting x equal to 0. Let me say that again. This is if x is equal to the value of 0, and this is setting x to the value of 0. And so this means that if x is equal to 0, which it is, it should run what's this inside here. And this is a one if statement. And you can put if and else statements inside one if statement. But basically these brackets here determines what's inside of it. You always have to have brackets after an if statement and after a lot of things. Like text main has a bracket, a beginning bracket and an ending one. And so there are curly brackets that basically now that if x is again equal to 0, it'll run whatever's inside of here, and if it's not, then it'll run whatever's inside of here. And so let me briefly let's try this out. And commenting out code is all you have to do is do // and you can write notes to yourself. And if you want to comment large portions of code, you do /* and then // Let's run the program. Cancel. Basically clear contents, and let's start it. So theoretically, if everything goes right, we are getting to this if statement. So let's start it. And let me briefly show you how to get to this debug stream. Like, we are writing to this debug stream, and to get there you just do debugger windows and click on debug stream. I also recommend clicking on remote screen so you can see what your NXT is doing. We start it, and we are getting to this if statement. That means that the code is getting there. Alright, so that's good. And we can mess around with this and say, what happens if we change this to 1? So it should get in here, but it should write this else statement. Since this isn't true, it automatically goes to this else statement. So let's run that. Let's clear our debug stream by right-clicking. You can just do clear all contents and start. And we are not getting to this if statement. All making sense so far, hopefully. Alright, so let's comment this out so we don't get confused. And then we can uncomment this. And this I will briefly talk about in a second. Okay, so this is an if statement. And notice that there are two arguments in here in this and thing. So basically we have a parenthesis and a closing parenthesis, and then we have x is equal to 0, and like this two ands means that this and this must be true. Therefore x has to be 0 and y has to be 10. So if I were to make this 0 and 10, so therefore this if statement is right. So if I were to run this, clear my contents, I should get this statement right here. Perfect. That means, so basically this means that x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 10, in the sense that they have the same value, not that they're set to, like I said before. But let's say like you're saying, well, if there's an and, if there's something to do and, there's also a way to do an or, and that's just two vertical lines, the same key as your or forward slash or whatever. Sorry. And so now if we were to change this to 11, although y is not the same value as 10, x's value is 0, so it should run. And so we do this, and we start it, clear the contents, start, and there we go. So that's just another useful information to use. So let's now go on to the for statement, and to keep things the same, I will comment this out, and keep this, and comment this out. There we go. Alright. This is a for statement. Basically, a for statement, like a while loop, like I will talk about in a second, loops through. So you start an you have to declare an integer, and in this case, I declare j, and j is equal to 0. Then you have a semicolon, and basically, like I didn't say before, as you can see, all the lines that I end with codes, except for like when you test things with if statements, you have to have a semicolon at the end. That basically is telling the computer that you're done with that line. And so basically I have j is equal to 0, I'm done with that, and I'm saying if j is greater than 10, like this is saying this is true right now, because since j is 0, this is in fact true. So therefore it will run over and over and over again until somehow j is more than 10. Notice that I have this j++. What that does is it adds one value to j every time you run this loop. And so basically, since j is 0, it should loop through once, and then loop through again, and loop through again, and again, and again, until j is equal to 10. And notice that I have this here. Basically the same thing as I've had up in the future, or up here, sorry. We are not getting this statement. You just have the double quotes, parentheses to do that. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm adding this value j, and this is a variable value. And notice that I have this %d in here. This is more helpful in debugging, because this %d will plug in this value of j. And so what that means is whatever value j is, it will write it out. And this \n it will write it on a new line in the debug stream. So let's try this out. Clear the debug stream again and start. Notice the value of j is 0, so it ran through it once. It made j 0, and then it ran through it and said it was 1, then it was 1, then it was 2, and it was 3, 4, and it added it up. It added it up until it got to 10, and since it had to be greater than 10, it didn't run anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. For statements can be useful if you know you have to increment something a certain amount of times. Alright, now let's move on to the while statement. Alright, and let's just... Alright, while true is basically telling this to run like the for statement, but just over and over and again, basically forever, because it's always true. It's always going to be true. And so if we were to run that, we would get this statement, we can never leave. That's what I wrote. Clear contents, start, and we can never leave, and it's just writing that on forever. And it's already, see how large, see how many times it's writing. I will stop, and I noticed that I messed up, and I want to write it on a new line. So like I said, you do a \n, and it should now write it on a new line. Let's clear this. Clear all contents, start. We can never leave, and it's writing so fast. Like look how small this is. Like since the you'd be surprised how many calculations a computer can do. But I bet you it's like, look how many times that it's done in that short of time. So basically that is a while true, and basically we use these for like buttons. Basically when you click a button, that's like saying when the button is clicked, it's true. So you'd have something like this, and when you click a button, like let's say we set the motor to 100%, when you'd click it, it would run the motor at 100%, and it's just, since it's clicking through so many times, it's like it's constantly on, and then when you click off, it's false, and it won't run whatever inside this while statement. So hopefully that makes sense as well. And so let's just comment that section out, and go lastly to the switch statement. The switch statement is kind of similar to if statements, but it's you use for more of a bulkier sense. So like what I mean by that is if switch n, so n is value of 1 right now, and you basically pass it an argument, an n, and you pass it like since int n, you pass it a variable. And so basically what this does is case 1 means if n is equal to 1, it runs whatever's inside of here, and if n is equal to 2, it runs whatever's inside of here, and if it isn't any of the cases, then it runs whatever's inside of here. And break is to get out of this loop. So let's run this, and since n is 1, we should get this statement right there. Let's clear this out first and start, and n is equal to 1, so that's perfect. Notice that if I change it to 2, it would give me the same, it would give me this, and if I were to make it 10, I would get this. Let's try that again just to make it more clear. I'd get that. So that it does not equal any of that. And this is just to one thing that I haven't mentioned before is we have this thing of equal, and if you do not equal, it's just like the term that programmers use is an exclamation point equal. So like if I were to do an if statement and I were to do if x is not equal to 0, then it would run whatever's inside of here. Yeah, I think that is all that. These are just basic C. These are basic just C statements that hopefully we can get used to. And feel free to watch this and play around with this while I do, to make sure that you really feel comfortable of what if and else statements can do, and make sure you get used to the commenting out stuff. And messing with these variables and messing with if and else statements and while true and all that stuff. And I forgot to tell you about this, but bool is a Boolean value, so you can change a to be true or false, and like I could just do, since I set a to be true, I could just type in a and it would work the same. So feel free to mess with this, and I will save it under guide 2, and therefore you guys can play around with this and get really good at this, because once you get good at this programming, the rest of the programming will seem very simple. Thank you.